The room went silent before the recording had even finished. Queen Camilla sat motionless as the unmistakable voice of Elizabeth II delivered a final private message concerning her place beside Charles, her responsibilities to the crown, and the limits the late monarch believed should never be crossed. Charles said nothing. William stared toward the table, and within minutes, a message meant to survive its author had shattered the balance inside the royal family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the recording continued. The Queen heard Elizabeth acknowledge the years she had stood beside Charles, then draw a line impossible to ignore. The crown, meaning the monarchy, and the duties attached to the sovereign, rather than simply the person wearing it, had to remain above personal loyalty. Elizabeth's message was specific. Affection could never become influence. Family interests could never overtake constitutional duty. And William's future position could never be weakened by private ambition. Charles listened without interrupting. The king understood why every word mattered, because this was not an ordinary family message preserved for sentiment. It had been recorded and sealed under restricted access, meaning only authorized officials could open it under conditions set in advance. William remained still as the voice turned toward succession, the formal process by which the crown passes from one monarch to the next. Then Camilla slowly removed her glasses and placed them beside untouched water. Charles saw the gesture. He did not reach for her. Elizabeth's voice became more deliberate. She explained through the recorded conversation that she had chosen audio because written words could be argued over or reinterpreted. Tone could not. Emphasis could not. She wanted whoever heard the message to understand where she believed the boundary lay. Camilla's face tightened when the late monarch separated personal forgiveness from institutional trust. The distinction cut deeply, because acceptance inside the family had never meant unlimited confidence inside the monarchy. A senior palace official then confirmed why the room had been assembled. The recording could only be opened once a succession-related condition named in Elizabeth's instructions had been triggered, and that condition had now been met. No one explained what event had activated it. That silence became its own warning. William finally looked toward his father. The prince had barely spoken, but Charles broke the stillness with one quiet instruction: stay behind. Camilla rose quietly and left without asking why. She had heard Elizabeth's judgment, but the deeper wound would come from discovering what Charles and William believed they were now expected to do with it. For Charles, the recording reopened grief. For William, it sounded like instruction. For Camilla, it felt dangerously close to a verdict. All three had known Elizabeth differently, loved her differently, and carried different memories of the years when the monarchy struggled to accommodate loyalty, scandal, duty, and succession under one roof. Now her recorded voice had forced those memories into the present, and nobody could pretend the message meant the same thing to everyone. Charles remained behind after Camilla left, but the silence around him had changed. Queen Elizabeth II had been his sovereign, yet she had also been his mother, and that made every surviving instruction painfully personal. A posthumous instruction was a direction intended to take effect after someone's death, and this one carried the authority of a monarch alongside the weight of a parent's final judgment. He could not dismiss it without feeling disloyal. He could not obey it blindly without wondering what it might do to his marriage. William understood the danger from another direction. As heir to the throne, the person next in line to become sovereign, he had spent years being prepared for responsibilities that would eventually become his alone. Elizabeth had taught him that succession was not simply inheritance. It was continuity, restraint, and the protection of the institution beyond any one relationship. When Charles quietly said the recording could not be treated like sentimental history, the prince did not argue. He knew his grandmother had designed those words for a moment when emotion and duty might collide. Camilla felt that collision most sharply. Elizabeth had praised her loyalty to Charles, yet the message placed firm boundaries around her influence over succession, protected royal property, and the next generation. The Queen Consort left the playback room and entered a smaller private sitting room without speaking to anyone. She closed the door herself, remained seated in her coat, and stared ahead until an aide cautiously asked whether she needed anything. "Not yet," she replied. The answer was quiet, but the hurt underneath it was unmistakable. William finally broke his silence with something Charles had not expected. He admitted that parts of the recording sounded familiar. Years earlier, his grandmother had spoken to him privately about the danger of personal loyalties becoming too powerful around a future monarch. She had never named Camilla. She had never accused anyone directly. But the future king now recognized the same careful language, and that recognition changed the meaning of everything they had just heard. Charles looked at his son and understood the next question before either man said it aloud. What had frightened Elizabeth enough to preserve such a warning? The recording had exposed the wound, but the reason she created it lay buried in an older confrontation the family had spent years refusing to revisit. The warning had not been born from vague suspicion. It began after one private royal gathering, when a disagreement that should have lasted minutes became something Elizabeth never forgot. No cameras captured it. No statement followed. Yet those present understood that a line had been crossed. Years later, the sealed recording would reveal that the late queen had carried the memory with her, and had quietly prepared for the possibility that the same struggle might return after her death. Elizabeth had already begun preparing the monarchy for the day Charles would inherit the throne. Senior family roles, royal residences, patronages, and the responsibilities of the next generation were being discussed with increasing urgency. Succession planning, the private process of preparing how duties and authority will pass from one reign to the next, mattered, because every decision made before the transition could shape the balance of power afterward. Camilla had also grown more confident by then, joining more conversations about how her husband's future household would function once he became sovereign. Camilla entered one private Windsor meeting, expecting a practical discussion. Instead, she found herself challenging a proposal that protected several major responsibilities exclusively for William and Catherine. She argued that Charles should retain wider freedom to decide how duties were distributed after accession, the formal moment when a new monarch takes the throne. Elizabeth listened until the disagreement became impossible to ignore. Then the Queen interrupted. Her message was cold and unmistakable. The future of the crown could not become a matter of personal preference. Charles immediately felt the room change. His mother closed the red briefing folder in front of her and asked everyone except him to leave. Camilla rose, knowing exactly what the gesture meant. She had not merely lost an argument. She had been removed from the conversation while her husband remained behind with the sovereign. The Queen Consort walked out humiliated, and the silence that followed stayed with her long after the meeting ended. Charles tried to soften the damage later. He told Camilla that Elizabeth's objection had been institutional, not personal, because the monarch believed certain responsibilities had to remain protected for the direct line of succession. But she did not hear neutrality in it. She heard history. Years of public judgment surrounding their relationship suddenly seemed to have entered a private royal room, and the old fear returned that acceptance would always come with conditions. Elizabeth acted soon afterward. According to a documented palace account, she requested a private recording session and ordered the resulting audio to be preserved separately from ordinary family correspondence. Camilla was not informed. Charles only understood the significance years later, when that very recording was opened and played back before them. The truth was now brutal in its simplicity. His mother had not recorded a reflection. She had created a safeguard because of that exact confrontation. And once Charles understood why the message existed, Avoiding its implications became impossible, because Camilla was about to ask him, face to face, whether he believed Elizabeth had been right. Camilla did not ask Charles whether the recording was genuine. She did not challenge Elizabeth's right to make it. Her question was far more dangerous. Did he agree with what his mother had said? For the first time since the audio was played, the issue stopped being about a dead queen's intentions and became a test of a living marriage. Charles could protect Camilla's feelings, or confirm that Elizabeth's warning still carried authority. Charles asked every advisor to remain outside before the conversation began. The king knew no formal decision could survive if the personal wound between them was left untouched. Royal advisors, the officials who guide the monarch on constitutional and household matters, could explain procedure later. They could not answer the question now sitting between husband and wife. Camilla had spent decades standing beside him, enduring public hostility, rebuilding her place, and proving loyalty through years of service. She wanted to know whether one recorded message had suddenly reduced all of that to suspicion. Camilla looked directly at him. "Do you believe her?" The queen consort did not raise her voice, and that restraint made the question heavier. Charles hesitated. Then he said he believed his mother had been protecting the crown as she understood it. The silence before his answer wounded her more than the answer itself. She had wanted reassurance. Instead, she heard confirmation that Elizabeth's fear still had power inside their marriage. Camilla's anger finally broke through. She accused Charles of allowing his mother's doubts to survive beyond death, while asking his wife to accept judgment without ever being given the chance to defend herself. The king answered that this was not about punishment, but she refused to let him hide behind duty. She reminded him that every boundary written around her carried the weight of their past, and every restriction risked turning old scandal into permanent royal policy. Charles then revealed what he had withheld. Elizabeth had not left the recording alone. According to the sealed instructions preserved with the audio, the sovereign was required to reconsider specific internal boundaries if the message was ever activated. A sealed instruction file was a restricted document intended to guide future action under predetermined conditions. This meant the recording was not simply memory. It had consequences. Charles placed his hand over the file, but did not push it toward her. Camilla noticed immediately. The queen consort understood that whatever came next had already moved beyond emotion. Then, the king delivered the detail that changed everything. William had to be present when the instructions were implemented. Camilla said nothing. The heir, not the wife beside the sovereign, now stood at the center of Elizabeth's final safeguard. The marriage had absorbed the emotional blow, but the real shift in power would come when the warning moved from private pain into royal procedure. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears as a signature, a restricted folder, or one chair deliberately left outside a meeting. Elizabeth understood that better than anyone. Her final message did not remove Camilla from Charles's life, nor did it erase her public dignity. Instead, it created something more precise: boundaries. And as those boundaries were finally read aloud, Camilla discovered exactly how carefully the late queen had separated marriage from monarchy. Charles opened the instruction file himself. The king quickly understood that the safeguard did not challenge his authority or his marriage, because its reach was far narrower and therefore far more deliberate. Succession-sensitive matters, meaning decisions directly connected to who inherits royal authority and how that future role is protected, would now be handled under stricter limits. Protected collections, heir-specific estates, and responsibilities reserved for the future sovereign would no longer be treated as ordinary family business. Camilla could remain beside him publicly, but she would not automatically stand inside every private decision. William listened without triumph. The prince's position mattered, because Elizabeth had deliberately connected parts of the instruction to him, rather than leaving everything solely in Charles's hands. That detail changed the balance. The future king was not being handed power over Camilla. He was being given a protective role over responsibilities that would one day become his. Charles reached the clause requiring consultation with his son before the queen consort could participate in certain succession-related discussions, and his voice slowed. William noticed immediately. He quietly told his father that he would not allow the arrangement to become a weapon against Camilla. The prince understood the difference between enforcing a boundary and humiliating someone who had already spent years under public judgment. Charles looked at him with visible relief. For the king, that mattered, because Elizabeth's safeguard could easily have reopened every old wound in the family. Instead, his son was choosing restraint. Another clause carried an even sharper message. Designated private royal items connected to earlier reigns were to remain outside the influence of spouses who entered the direct line through marriage. The wording was cold, but its purpose was broader than Camilla. Elizabeth had created a precedent, a rule intended to guide similar situations in the future, so that no spouse, favorite, or family relationship could quietly reshape what belonged to the next sovereign. Camilla received the formal explanation soon afterward. The queen consort was told that several future meetings would proceed without her, even when Charles attended. She understood the language. She understood the logic. But understanding did not make it painless. The safeguard had finally become policy. And the first time a door closed while Camilla remained outside it, Elizabeth's warning would stop feeling like history and begin feeling like her new reality. No crown was removed, no title disappeared. Yet for Camilla, the change became real, with something far smaller, a meeting she had expected to enter, and was suddenly told she would not attend. The instruction was polite, almost painfully so. William was already inside. Charles was waiting. Camilla stood in the corridor for only a few seconds before turning away, but those seconds transformed Elizabeth's warning from recorded history into a new royal reality. Camilla approached the meeting room expecting routine discussion. Instead, an equerry quietly informed her that the session was restricted. An equerry is a senior royal aide who assists members of the family with official and private duties. And in that moment, his message carried more weight than any public announcement. The queen consort froze, gave one controlled nod, and turned before anyone nearby could fully read her face. Inside, Charles and William were discussing future royal responsibilities and protected family assets, exactly the kind of matters Elizabeth's safeguard had placed behind a new boundary. Camilla understood the distinction, but that did not soften it. She had not been removed from ordinary royal life, stripped of public duties, or pushed away from Charles. The restriction applied only to narrowly defined succession-sensitive decisions, meaning matters directly tied to the future sovereign and protected inheritance of royal authority. That precision made the humiliation sharper. She could stand beside the king in public and still be told that one private door was no longer hers to open. Camilla returned to her rooms and finally spoke to a trusted aide. The queen consort said the worst part was not losing influence. It was knowing Elizabeth had imagined a future in which such limits might become necessary at all. That realization cut deeper than the rule itself. She had spent years believing acceptance had slowly replaced suspicion. Now a dead monarch's instructions seemed to prove that some doubts had never fully disappeared. William, meanwhile, surprised Charles inside the meeting. The prince questioned whether every provision should be enforced with absolute rigidity, arguing that protecting the institution should never become a public humiliation of his stepmother. The king listened carefully. His son was not challenging Elizabeth's wishes. He was drawing a line between obedience and punishment. Charles agreed. The family would preserve every structural boundary his mother had designed, but Camilla's dignity would also be protected. Her public standing would remain intact. No announcement would turn the safeguard into spectacle. William then made one final request. He wanted to speak to Camilla alone. No Charles, no advisors, no secretaries, no one capable of softening the truth between them. The institution had already spoken through Elizabeth's instructions. Now the future king and the queen consort would have to speak for themselves. For years, William and Camilla had carried a history neither could erase. Diana's memory existed between them. Charles's happiness existed between them. So did duty. But when William entered the room alone, there were no courtiers to translate their words, and no sovereign to decide who was right. The heir had come to explain what Elizabeth's message meant to him personally, and Camilla finally had the chance to answer someone who would one day inherit everything the recording was designed to protect. William spoke first. The prince told Camilla he did not see the recording as permission to reopen old battles, or punish anyone for decisions made decades earlier. His responsibility was narrower and heavier. Preserve the constitutional boundary Elizabeth believed essential. A constitutional boundary is a limit designed to keep personal relationships from interfering with the formal responsibilities of the monarchy. He understood why that mattered, because his grandmother had spent years preparing him for a future in which affection could never be allowed to decide who controlled the crown. Camilla listened without interrupting. The queen consort admitted that her relationship with Elizabeth had never been the same as William's, and she accepted that the late monarch had prepared him for duties others were never meant to share. But then her restraint broke. She told him that hearing affection separated from trust made decades of service feel suddenly meaningless, as though every public duty and every year beside Charles had been measured against the darkest chapter of her past. William did not dismiss the pain. The future king said he understood why the message had wounded her, but he could not pretend history vanished simply because the family had learned to live around it. Diana's memory remained part of that history. So did everything that followed. Camilla lowered her voice, and for once, there was no argument about who had suffered more. There was only the uncomfortable truth that survival had never meant forgetting. William then revealed something unexpected from a private conversation with Elizabeth. His grandmother had warned him too. She had told him that future authority must never be used emotionally, especially against people connected to old family wounds. Her safeguard protected him from interference, but it also placed a restraint on him. Power, she had insisted, was not permission for revenge. Camilla studied him for several seconds. William told her plainly that he would uphold the limits, but would never weaponize them against her. The queen consort finally answered, "That is more than I expected." It was not forgiveness. It was something quieter, acceptance, without pretending the past had disappeared. Their private understanding steadied the family. At the exact moment control began slipping beyond palace walls. Inside, the tension had finally eased. Outside, Elizabeth's recorded words were spreading fast, and Camilla's private reckoning was about to become a national judgment. By morning, the private pain had become public history. Broadcasters abandoned routine royal coverage. Newspapers treated Elizabeth's words not as gossip, but as a final intervention from Britain's longest-reigning queen. Supporters of Camilla saw an old wound being reopened unnecessarily. Critics saw vindication, yet the strongest public reaction centered on something more complicated. Elizabeth had accepted Camilla beside Charles, while still drawing a boundary around the crown's future. Britain was now debating whether that distinction was cruelty or duty. Camilla watched the coverage in private and quickly understood that the argument had escaped the palace. Commentators stressed that Elizabeth's message had not rejected her marriage to Charles or erased years of royal service. Instead, it had separated personal acceptance from institutional authority. Institutional authority means the formal power connected to the monarchy rather than the private influence of any family member. And that distinction now dominated every discussion. The Queen Consort remained composed until one presenter repeated the idea that supporting the king was not the same as shaping the succession. Then her expression changed. Charles refused to let that pain become public abandonment. The king rejected suggestions from advisors that he should create visible distance from Camilla, while the controversy intensified. Honoring his mother's safeguard, he insisted, did not require humiliating his wife. Palace officials then issued a controlled statement stressing continuity, family unity, and respect for Elizabeth's instructions, without releasing the private recording in full. The response mattered because silence could look like panic, while too much detail risked turning a deeply personal message into spectacle. The public reaction crystallized outside Buckingham Palace. A morning newspaper appeared with the front-page headline, "Elizabeth's Last Line," beneath an image of Elizabeth, Charles, Camilla, and William together. By midday, a quiet crowd had gathered near the gates. Some carried flowers for the late Queen. Others stood reading the headline on their phones, debating whether she had protected the monarchy or delivered one final judgment against Camilla. A national broadcaster then shifted the entire conversation. During a special report, the recording was described as Elizabeth's final separation of family affection from constitutional duty. The phrase moved attention away from old scandal and toward a larger question of succession. William's position suddenly seemed less like victory and more like responsibility. Camilla's restriction looked less like banishment and more like a boundary Elizabeth believed should apply beyond any one person. Charles heard the new framing and knew the moment had arrived. The public had delivered its arguments, but only he could decide what the recording would ultimately mean inside his family. His final response could deepen Camilla's humiliation, or define a new balance between marriage, memory, and monarchy. In the end, Elizabeth's recording did not destroy a marriage, remove a queen, or create a victor. It forced something more difficult: clarity. Charles could love Camilla without surrendering the boundaries his mother believed protected the crown. William could defend his future responsibilities without turning history into revenge. And Camilla could finally understand that Elizabeth's final message was neither absolution nor condemnation. It was the late Queen's last attempt to separate human loyalty from constitutional duty, and make both survive. Charles made the final decision without drama. The king confirmed that Elizabeth's succession safeguards would remain in force, meaning the restrictions she designed to protect the future transfer of royal authority would now become part of the monarchy's internal framework. Camilla would continue representing the crown beside him, but she would accept firm limits around succession-sensitive decisions and protected matters reserved for the sovereign and heir. The Queen Consort had not been erased. She had been given a boundary that could no longer be negotiated away. Camilla faced Charles alone after the decision. The king told her he would not pretend the recording had not hurt her, and he would not pretend hearing his mother's judgment had been easy for him either. But he could not dishonor Elizabeth's final request simply to make the pain disappear. The Queen Consort listened, then answered with a sentence that ended the argument between them. She no longer expected him to choose between his mother's legacy and his wife. William joined them later, but there was no confrontation left to fight. The prince told Camilla he intended to respect her public place, while protecting the responsibilities Elizabeth had entrusted to him. Hereditary duty, the responsibility passed through the royal line from one generation to the next, had been the real subject of the recording all along. The late monarch had not feared one woman alone. She had feared what could happen whenever personal love, family loyalty, or old resentment began pushing against the limits of the crown. Camilla finally understood the full weight of that distinction. She emerged with less private influence, but without public disgrace. Charles remained loyal to his wife, while affirming the judgment of his mother. William gained stronger authority, but refused to use it as revenge. No one truly won. Yet no one had to be destroyed for Elizabeth's warning to survive. The recording left behind one final lesson. Love could soften the people inside the monarchy, but duty still determined where power stopped. Camilla was broken not because Charles abandoned her, but because she finally heard, in Elizabeth's own recorded voice, the boundary the late queen had always intended to outlive them all. Charles kept his marriage. William inherited the responsibility meant to protect his future. And Camilla accepted that the crown would always belong to something larger than any one relationship. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.